Mr. Chair, this is an important time for this country. We know there's a number of threats economically. It is not an easy task to deal with them, but we have seen this movie before. The former Prime Minister Trudeau said that he would spend just a little bit of extra money in deficits, some small deficits, in order to get big economic gains. What did we have? Well, a decade of very poor economic performance, $100 billion of deficits before we hit COVID, multiple hundreds of billions of dollars of deficits in COVID. You had multiple commentators, including the Bank of Canada and well-known economists, telling the government that their spending was contributing to inflation. The Bank of Canada went so far as to say, why do we care about inflation so much? Well, because it hurts low-income and vulnerable Canadians the most. That is why we should care about inflation. You know who benefits from inflation, Mr. Chair? The government and people who own assets. Government revenues have never been higher. They exploded during the inflationary environment, and this government could not help itself but spend all of that money and more. In 2015, before this government took over 10 years ago, the federal government spent about $300 billion on its expenditures. That number today is expected to be $530 billion for the fiscal year that just ended. That is a substantial increase in spending, and yet they are still so far away from balancing the budget, and we're not even in a recession, Mr. Chair. So what's going to happen to the federal fiscal finances if, heaven forbid, a recession takes place? The Parliamentary Budget Officer has warned that the government finances are unstable, or unsustainable, excuse me. For example, in 2015, the federal government spent 7.5 cents out of every expense dollar on paying interest on the debt. Today, that number is over 10, and it is expected to go to 14 cents of every dollar in just a few years. In real dollar value, that's $80 billion a year in just a few short years we'll be paying on interest on the debt. And why is that the case? Well, it's really because the government took on too much debt in the first place. But it's not just that. It's that the debt the government took on, they did so absolutely negligently in borrowing in all short-term debt. You had countries during COVID, like Austria, issue a 100-year bond. Mexico, average term to maturity in Mexico is 18 years. In Canada, the average term to maturity is 6. Heck, even the provincial government in Ontario is 12 years. What this government has done to the management of this nation's finances is nothing short of embarrassing. We will be doubling the amount that this government spends on interest on the debt in a decade. That means less money for social services. The IMF, which members of the government love to tout as a wonderful multilateral institution, has already acknowledged for every single penny that is spent on interest on the debt, a corresponding amount is cut from social services. That is why we care about spending. Those individuals in this chamber and those individuals outside who are warning that this government was spending too much a few short years ago were laughed out of the room because our debt to GDP ratio was falling or we weren't spending that much on interest on the debt. Well, now look at where we are. And this is before we are even in a recession. Secondly, the Bank of Canada has warned in May that 40% of the government's debt issuance is purchased by hedge funds. Why should we care about that? That means 40% of the debt issued by the government is purchased by financial speculators who don't even hold the debt for very long. They buy it, they sell it immediately in the repo market. What is going to happen to our interest rates if something outside of Canada, a sovereign debt issue or a crisis somewhere else, global economic uncertainty, causes this cycle or the ability for these hedge funds and financial speculators to not have liquidity or not be able to sell the debt they purchase. Who is going to buy the debt then? Yields will increase, interest on the debt will increase, social services will have to be cut. Or, of course, we can get back to the Central Bank of Canada purchasing the debt of this nation again, monetizing the debt, which is in effect, yes, Mr. Chair, printing money. And what happens when you print money? Inflation goes up. You create a massive gap between those who hold assets and those who do not. For all of this government's focus on low-income individuals, their absolute blindness on recognizing the negative effects of inflation on low-income and vulnerable Canadians is deplorable, because they have actually overseen an increasing of wealth and income disparity in this country over the last 10 years. Over the previous Harper administration, Mr. Chair, it actually went down. Wealth and income disparity did not go up under the previous Conservative government. It's actually gone up under the Liberal government in the last 10 years. Why? Because their policies and inflationary deficits have made those who hold assets richer and those who don't poorer. That's what happens. This is actually simple economics, and I would have expected from a well-regarded, well-renowned Prime Minister who has all of these accolades and says he knows better than everyone else. Well, he did not run on spending double what Mr. Trudeau spent in terms of deficits. Their other policies also lead to inflation everywhere. It's not just food. Think of insurance costs. Because this government has made this country uninvestable, reinsurers have left this country, which means there's less competition in insurance, which is why insurance rates for commercial and auto insurance are going through the roof. In addition to the fact that they don't seem to care, or only recently seem to care, about stolen cars. But I was at my favorite watering hole last night, Stolen Goods. What a wonderful place. They're telling me that they spend about a third of their equivalent rent payments in just to insure commercial insurance for their enterprise. This is unsustainable. These are a direct result. These economic policies are a direct result, and the outcomes are a direct result of this government's lack of focus on the economy, believing that they can solve every problem with spending more money. And you know what, Mr. Chair? The Prime Minister just went down to the Oval Office. I would be embarrassed if I was a Liberal MP sitting here today, because the Prime Minister campaigned and said that Conservatives would kneel before the altar of Mr. Trump. Well, what did the Prime Minister do? Here's a couple headlines. It's humiliating to kowtow to Trump, but what choice does the Prime Minister have? That's in the Globe and Mail. Althea Raj writes in the Toronto Star that the Prime Minister and Donald Trump put on a show of affection. She even called it a bromance. So I think it's reasonable to point that out, but we're here today to stop the unnecessary inflationary deficits, and that's what Conservatives are here to do, Mr. Chair.
Well,